My name is Honesty Boone, and I get the privilege of serving as ASDA's national president. I'll be getting us started tonight and moderating for the webinar. Just a few years ago, I was a pre-dent, curious about how to be a prepared applicant and tuning into ASDA webinars just like you. And now I'm a third-year dental student at UCLA, and pictured on the slide, you can see the community that ASDA has given me over the years, in addition to all that I've learned throughout my involvement and time in ASDA so far. And I'm so excited to share with you what pre-dental membership is all about and how you can be a part of it. Pre-dental membership with ASDA will allow you to get connected to dental students before you even become one, and it can help you build a solid network. Membership can help you shine on your resume and may come up in many of your dental school interviews. You can build on your leadership skills through ASDA's pre-dental experience, and ultimately, you can be in a leadership position like I am today. So diving into the actual pre-dental membership benefits, being a pre-dental member automatically gets you a copy of ASDA's Getting into Dental School Guide, which provides vital admission information on every dental school in the United States. And it also provides you with application tips, interview preparation, financial planning guidance, and so much more. And so all pre-dental members will also receive regular communications from ASDA that includes event information, resources, networking tips, and topics related to getting into dental school. And finally, one of the newest benefits that ASDA has created for pre-dental members is the Mentor Match program. Throughout the year, pre-dental students can sign up and be paired with a dental student mentor to help them prepare for dental school. And any ASDA pre-dental member who is interested can scan the QR code on the screen to be paired with the mentor. The next match will take place in June, so now's the time to register for the program, and I'll provide a moment for you all to be able to scan the QR code on the slide. Okay. Thanks y'all for scanning the QR code. Again, keep going. I also want to share the QR code for joining to become an ASDA pre-dental member. At just $61, you can attain some of the benefits that are exclusive that I mentioned previously, and you can really connect with the pre-dental student community that's here to support you along your way in your journey. So at this time, go ahead and scan the QR code if you're interested in becoming a pre-dental member today. And you can also visit asdanet.org/join to get more information as well. Thanks y'all for signing or scanning that QR code. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker, Nick Hussong, Senior Manager of Test Administration and Production Systems in the American Dental Association's Department of Testing Services. The department oversees the administration of over 40,000 tests annually, and Nick has been with the ADA for over 15 years. Let's give a warm welcome to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Honesty, and thank you to ASDA for having me and letting me give this presentation. I always like talking to pre-dental students and helping them prepare for taking the DAT and all of the sort of common pitfalls that come along with that, to make sure that everybody is prepared as possible. So as Honesty said, my name is Nick Hussong. I'm the Senior Manager of Test Administration and Production Systems at the Department of Testing Services. And tonight I'm going to go over some basics on the DAT, as well as getting into some general guidelines that I have come up with over the years on how to best prepare, and then go over some of the rules and common missteps that I think some people make as they prepare for the test or as they take the test. I like to start by giving a brief history of the DAT, so students have a sense of where this came from and why it is a requirement for getting into dental school. So the development of the DAT began shortly after World War II. At that time, dental schools were seeing an attrition rate of 20 to 25% of the dental students that they admitted did not make it to graduation, which is a very high number. And a contributing factor to that was that they were getting a lot of veterans who were applying to dental school who had been out of school for quite some time. And so they wanted a way to better assess how well people were prepared for the rigors of dental school. And that is where the dental admission test came in. The test originally included a chalk carving hand skills test where you would take a little knife and a piece of chalk and you had to carve it into a specific shape. In 1972, that was replaced by the spatial relations test, and then that was replaced by the perceptual motor ability test, what we call the PAT, that you're probably familiar with at this point. Originally, the test was scored from -1 to 9. In 1988, that was switched to 1 to 30. And then just last year, the scale score changed from 1 to 30 to 200 to 600. The test is designed to help dental schools assess how well someone is prepared in the science areas and the perceptual ability and math for what they are going to encounter in dental school. And the purpose of the test drives how we design it from the test content to the administration policies and the procedures, and how we offer the scores for interpretation to the dental schools. We routinely do validity studies to make sure that what we are providing to schools is of benefit to them. And those validity studies have shown with consistency that in conjunction with academic records, the DAT scores are useful in predicting how well someone is going to perform in their first 2 years of dental school. All of the U.S. dental schools require the DAT, though the test scores are just one piece of the puzzle that they use as they are assessing applicants to their program. To start off your process of taking the DAT, I'm sure many of you have already done this, you would register for a dent pin. The dent pin is a unique 8-digit identifier that we use so that we don't have to collect more personal data like social security number or anything like that. This number will follow you through dental school. It is what you will use to sign up for the integrated national board exam. And then into the future, if you should ever need us to send your scores to advanced programs or to other state dental boards, you would also use this number. So it is an important number to keep track of. One thing that I find is a lot of times students will give their student email address as the email address. I would caution against that for a couple reasons. School emails generally have strong spam filters and will often route emails that we send out into spam. And then also you will lose access within a couple years after graduation, you lose access to your student email. So I would recommend when you register that you give a personal email address rather than your school email address. So that way you will always have access to it. If you gave your school email address when you registered for your dent pin, don't worry, you can sign into the system and change your email address at any point. I would also strongly encourage you to make yourself familiar with the DAT website, ada.org/DAT. It contains a number of resources as well as the candidate guide, which I will reference numerous times throughout the webinar this evening. I find a lot of students don't go through all the resources on the website and specifically the candidate guide. And I strongly encourage you to go through it as it contains all of the rules related to the test, but as well as all of the test specifications, test timing, and things like that. Once you have your dent pin, you would sign into our system and you would submit your application to take the test. It's an entirely electronic process. You apply through the website. Generally, the application for the test will be processed immediately. So as soon as you submit the application and payment, the application is processed, and that starts a 6-month window of eligibility that you have to take the test. So if you applied today on May 28th, you would have until November 28th to sit for the test. A question that I get asked a lot is how far in advance candidates should submit their application to take the test. We encourage people to try to sign up 60 to 90 days before their desired test date. That's not a requirement. It's just something that I encourage so that you can get the test date that you really want. The closer to your desired test date that you apply, the less likely it is that you will be able to get your desired test date. This is the busiest time of year. We're going into the busiest time of year for DAT tests through the summer, and so appointments can become pretty limited at specific test centers. The test is administered every day at Prometric testing centers throughout the U.S. And Canada. Um, Generally speaking, there will be a test center close. And unless there is not much availability for testing appointments at the one nearest to you, hopefully you don't have to travel very far in order to take the test. Prometric provides a secure testing environment. It is standardized. All students take the test on the same computer program with the same monitors, the same setup, no matter where you are taking the test. When you go in for your scheduled test date, you will be fingerprinted, and the test centers also have video monitoring throughout the test center. Should anything go wrong, we can always access the videos of someone's testing appointment to check for any irregularities or any misconduct or anything like that. For more information, you can go to Prometric's website. There's a lot of information on their website as well. You can also, before you sign up for the test, you can always go to their website and check the availability of testing appointments at the test center nearest to you. On the screen is the fees for this year for taking the test. The score report fee is listed there, but generally speaking, students taking the test don't have to pay for that. That covers the request for any schools you ask us to send your scores to after you submit your application for the test. Any schools that you mark on your application to take the DAT are free of charge. It's included in your application fee. So if you have not yet signed up or submitted your application to take the DAT, when you do so, I strongly encourage you to select every dental school, whether you intend to apply to them or not. There's no harm in submitting your scores to a school that you're not going to apply to. As long as you request to have your scores sent to any one program, any one dental school, we will also send your scores to a DIA ADSAS. So there's not a distinct selection for a DIA ADSAS. Just know that if you have your scores sent to any dental school, we will also send the scores to a DIA ADSAS. There is also a fee you can pay to get a 45-day extension of the 6-month eligibility window. If you find that you're not going to be able to test within your 6 months, you can pay $150 and have that 6 months extended for 45 days. If you do not test within your 6-month window of eligibility, we would consider your application to be expired. And then you would have to submit a new application and fee in order to take the test. So definitely be sure that you're going to test within the next 6 months before you submit your application and payment. On your application to take the test, it is going to ask if you intend to test with testing accommodations. We do offer accommodations for people with a physical or mental impairment that meets the criteria for a disability. It is entirely private. There's no additional fee for testing with accommodations. We will never share that you tested with accommodations with any of the schools that you're sending your scores to. It will not be indicated anywhere on your test scores. We won't let anyone know that you tested with accommodations. That would in fact be a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. In order to test with accommodations, it's a yes, no question. Are you requesting testing accommodations on the DAT? If you mark yes, at the end of the application, it will give you the opportunity to indicate what accommodations you are asking for. And then it will give you the option of uploading supporting documentation that is required in order to get testing accommodations. The documents that are required are listed at the bottom of the slide here. Common accommodations are things like time and a half, double time, testing in a separate room, testing over multiple days if whatever the condition is. Make someone's focus slip over time. You can request to have the test broken up into 2 days rather than testing in one day as the test is normally taken. The test, as I said, is administered on computers at Prometric. The schedule for the test is on the screen here. It starts with the Survey of Natural Sciences and then goes into the perceptual ability test. Then there's a break, and then it goes into the reading comprehension, and the quantitative reasoning is the last piece of the test. Detailed test specifications are in the DAT guide I referenced earlier on page 4. It will list everything that could possibly be on the test in every one of the subjects covered. So you will not necessarily see questions about everything that is listed in the test specifications, but there will not be questions about anything that is not listed in the test specifications. So I really strongly recommend that you go to the website and read through those test specifications. Make sure that you have study materials that cover all of the subjects that are going to be covered in the test. This is an example of what the test specifications look like. It gives you a breakdown of how many questions are in each subject area, and then breaks down all of the possible subjects within each area and how many questions are specific to that area. We'll also post on the DAT website and within the DAT guide any changes that are going to be coming up. There aren't currently any changes scheduled for the DAT, but if there were, they would be posted to the website and within the DAT guide itself. Getting into how to prepare for the test, the ADA does not endorse any third-party study materials or courses because none of them received, or none of the information that they provide was received from the ADA. So we haven't done any quality control. We're not sure how accurate the information they're providing is. That is not to say that third-party study materials aren't helpful. I hear from students on the post-test survey that they find practice tests and different DAT courses very helpful. Just any course that you are taking or anything that you are using to take the test, I would just strongly encourage you to cross-reference what the information you are receiving from them with the information that is in the DAT guide and on the DAT website to make sure that the rules that they're providing you are accurate and that the study materials are covering the appropriate material that is going to be on the test. If you ever have any questions about anything, you can always reach out to the Department of Testing Services. You can email datexam@ada.org or give us a call at the number that is listed on the screen, and I'll have that again at the end of the presentation. There is a practice test that the ADA makes available. It is not intended as a study tool in and of itself. The purpose of the practice test that we offer is to familiarize students with how the test works on the computer, what it's going to look like, and how the questions are timed. The timing of the test is the same in the practice test as it is in the real test. But whether you take the ADA practice test or third-party practice tests, I would strongly recommend that you not use those as your only source of studying. We fully expect that students have taken undergraduate courses in all subjects that are going to be presented on the DAT, and we would encourage you to use your textbooks and class notes as the primary study tools. I can't give you a magic formula for getting a high score on the DAT. It doesn't exist. It's going to depend on how you best prepare as an individual, what is best for you, and how you best retain information. I will say that one of the reasons that I am so strongly encouraging people to familiarize themselves with all the subjects covered and the rules for the test is that I think it's very important for students to feel comfortable when they arrive at the test center, to know exactly what's going to happen, what the process is going to look like, not just with the test itself, but getting checked in at the test center, um, what IDs you have to present, and things like that. I think a major pitfall that a lot of students fall into is not being fully prepared and then feeling anxious for the test. And I believe that if you are anxious, that makes you less prepared to do well on the test because it's part of your brain that is being occupied by worry rather than being able to focus on the test that is in front of you. As I've said many times now, I strongly encourage you to review the test specifications. Based on that, identify your areas of strength and weakness. You may want to consult with your faculty and advisors, your pre-health advisor, to make a plan for how you're going to study for the test. Obviously, you can probably study less your areas of strength and focus more on your areas of weakness. Um, know the rules for taking the test. It's always a shame. It happens a few times a year where somebody who didn't know the rules of the test ran afoul of one of the rules and had their scores voided and had to submit another application and payment to be able to take the test. You can actually run into a retest penalty where you're not allowed to test for a year or two, depending on what rule was broken. Um, Study differently if you retake the test. This is an important one. I hear from students very often when they retake the test, they complain that they got the exact same score that they got the first time, which generally is an indication that the test is functioning as it is calibrated to do. Um, the test is designed to be an accurate measure of your ability level. So, in order to get a higher score on the test, you have to raise your ability level in the subjects covered on the test, which is a difficult thing to do. And so, what I always tell students when we have these conversations is that if you take the test and get a specific score and then want to get a higher score, unless you felt unprepared for sections of the test, you cannot go back and just do more of what you did the first time in order to prepare for the test. Doing the same thing that you were doing, studying in the same way, and just studying more is likely to get you the same score that you got the first time. So I can't tell you exactly what to do differently, but I would tell you to switch up what you are doing, um, and to really think about that frame of reference, that in order to get a higher score, you have to raise your ability level in one or more of the different areas on the test. And so it is likely not sufficient to just go over the same materials in the same way. Um, I also always encourage students to give themselves an appropriate amount of time. I can't tell you how long that should be. I've heard from some students that they study every day for 6 to 8 hours a day for 2 months before they take the test. I've heard from other students that they studied for 4 hours a day for 2 weeks before the test, and that was sufficient for them. So it all depends on you individually and how long you need. But be realistic. Don't tell yourself that don't make a plan that says you're going to study for 6 to 8 hours a day if you know that you're not going to do that. Make sure that all of the different areas you want to get into are covered in your study plan. Make sure that you know that you're going to be able to get through everything you intend to get through as you prepare for the test. These are some of the resources that are available through either our website or through Prometric's website. As I said, there's a practice test. There's also a tutorial that gives you a brief intro on what the test will look like on the exam. The practice test includes questions that will look just like the questions that are on the um, DAT. Every question on the DAT is single response, multiple choice, like you see on the right, and then below there, some of the PAT questions. There's also a list of reference texts that is available on the website. Those are the textbooks that the test constructors used to create the questions for the test. And so if you are worried that you don't have sufficient texts to help you, those texts are a great place to start making sure that you have all of the information you need. Prometric also offers a test drive. This is for especially useful for people who are going to be anxious going into the test center and checking in for the test. So the test drive, you actually can go to the test center itself, the test center where you will take the test. You can go in a week ahead of time, and they will check you in the same way that they will check you in when you actually take the test. They will check your IDs to make sure your IDs are what they are looking for. Um, so I don't recommend that to everyone, but if you know that checking in for tests or something like that is likely to make you anxious, you can go through the process ahead of time, hopefully to alleviate some of that anxiety. Once you have scheduled your test, you can reschedule it as long as you do it more than 24 hours in advance. And that is based on business days. So if you are testing on a Sunday, you can't reschedule it on Saturday, or if you're testing on a Monday, you have to reschedule it by the Friday before that Monday. But you can reschedule up to 24 hours in advance of your test. You would do that either through the Prometric website or by calling Prometric. There is a fee associated with it. The fee depends on how far in advance you are rescheduling your test. The fees are listed there at the bottom of the slide. Um, if you no show for your appointment, if you have an appointment scheduled and you don't show up, the contractual agreement we have with Prometric says that we have to pay them for that test, whether you took it or not. Um, so if you no show, you will have to reapply for the test and pay the full testing fee over again. So again, I strongly encourage you to be very conscientious when you are setting your appointment. Make sure that it is an appointment that you can keep. That said, things happen. Obviously, if something comes up that is an emergency, you get sick or are in a car crash or there's a family emergency, the criteria that we use and that Prometric uses is would we reasonably expect someone to be able to test under the circumstances under which they found themselves? And so if something like that comes up, um, you can cancel or reschedule or have your application reset if you were a no-show. You would just have to provide documentation, an explanation of what happened, and then provide documentation confirming whatever it is that stopped you from being able to take the test. That also applies if you're coming up to the end of your 6-month window of eligibility and something happens that stops you from being able to test. If you can provide documentation and we agree that you could not reasonably have been expected to test within your eligibility window, you can get an extension without having to pay for the extension. Um, so just make sure that is communicated as quickly as possible to us or to Prometric, to the ADA or to Prometric. It's much harder for us to do anything if you contact us after the fact versus when it happens or ahead of your testing appointment. Here is a checklist of um, things to make sure that you're not creating problems for yourself on testing day. You will have to show up to the test center with two original current IDs. One of them has to be government issued and has to have your photograph and signature. Usually people will use a driver's license, state ID, or passport. And then the second one does not need to have a photograph, but it does need to have your name and signature. That can be a credit card, debit card, student ID, really anything that has your name and your signature on it. But you do need to present both a primary ID and a secondary ID. The IDs must match the name on your dent pin. Your dent pin determines what name goes onto your application. So your IDs have to match your dent pin and have to match each other. Um, there is some leeway, as it says there, with middle name especially. If your middle name is spelled out on one ID and is just an initial on another ID, that's fine. But if there's names missing, that can cause a problem. So just make sure, absolutely sure that your two IDs match each other and match your dent pin. Another big one that I find students often inadvertently run up against is checking their cell phones during unscheduled breaks. That's an absolute violation of the rules and can lead to some pretty significant penalties. When you show up at the test center, they will have lockers, and other than your IDs, you are going to put everything you brought in with you into those lockers. You'll lock the locker, take the key into the testing room with you. You should never access that locker unless you're on the scheduled break during the test. If you're on a scheduled break and there's no test content live on the screen, then you can access your locker and you can check your phone, you can do whatever you want. But if you leave the testing room on an unscheduled break and there is test content live, you cannot go to your locker and you especially cannot access your cell phone. There's no way for us or the test center to know what you're looking at on your phone. And so the assumption is going to be that you were looking up the answers to questions on the test before going in and changing your answers. So just make absolutely sure that if you are on an unscheduled break, that you do not go to your locker and that especially you do not look at your phone. It does happen sometimes that problems will come up during the test. We've had it happen where the power goes out at the test center and you lose some time before they can get the test booted back up on the computer. If there's anything going on at the test center, you raise your hand and one of the test center administrators will come to you, and you can let them know what the problem is, and then they should remedy the problem for you to your satisfaction. If you are not satisfied or you don't believe that they fixed the problem, you should stop testing. Do not continue the test if you believe something has gone wrong. We can get pretty detailed logs of what happened on your test, and we can get the video of the test as well. So if something is going wrong, we will almost always be able to tell and corroborate whatever the story is, with what was happening at the test center. If that does happen, you would just contact testing problems at ada.org about whatever it is that happened and let us know, explain what the situation was in as much detail as possible, give your dent pin, and then as long as we can corroborate whatever the issue was that you were encountering, we will get you set up to retest as soon as possible. A lot of times, I think people are under the impression that it's best to just push through and finish the test just to get it done with because I don't know, think that that's the only option available to them. Please do not do that. If there is anything going wrong, stop taking the test and notify us, unless the issue can be fixed to your satisfaction at the test center. It used to be that when you were finished with the test, you would receive an unofficial score report printed out for you at the test center. Since the scale score changed to 200 to 600, that is no longer possible. It takes generally about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. It can take up to 4 weeks for scores to be released after you take the test, and so that's the earliest you would find out your scores, is 2 to 4 weeks after you take the test. You'll get an email that lets you know when your scores are posted. Um, there is that delay because we audit all scores for accuracy, as well as waiting to hear from the test center that there were no irregularities, that nothing went wrong during the test. As I mentioned on the first slide, the history slide, scores are presented on a scale of 200 to 600 in 10-digit increments. A lot of times people ask me what constitutes a good score on the DAT. That's going to depend on which schools you're applying to. The different schools have their own criteria for how they evaluate what constitutes a good score, what's a score they're looking for. I can tell you that 400 or 410 is average on the test. So above a 400 or 410 is above average, below 400 or 410 is below average. Um, there are no penalties for guessing on the test. Um, Guessing may not help your score, but it isn't going to hurt. So don't leave any questions blank, even if you don't know the answer. Do your best. Make your best guess. There's no passing or failing scores. It's an admission test, so you're being judged by how your scores compare to other applicants, not against a pass-fail criteria. As I mentioned, we do monitor all of the testing attempts, and there are penalties for misconduct or policy violations, and those can be pretty severe. Like I said, you can be prohibited from retesting for a year or two, depending on what happens. There is also a detailed score analysis that is in a document on the DAT website called the DAT User's Manual. It gets into a lot of the technicalities of how the test is scored and how we calibrate the test to make sure that it is accurately measuring student performance. So if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can look at that document, but that is more for the people that are looking at the test. One other thing I would say, I often get asked how far in advance or when is the best time to take the test, or what is the last possible time you could take the test. I would just say um, the latest you should take the test is probably a month before your scores are due anywhere for a deadline. Um, I would certainly allow a month. So if your scores need to be in by September 1st, make sure you're testing by August 1st. That way you make sure that the 4 weeks that it can take to score the test, you have enough time for your scores to be posted and sent out to the schools you marked to receive your scores and over to AdSAS. It can take AdSAS a few business days after we send the scores to upload them onto your application. Um, so that is something else to keep in mind, that even though it can take us 4 weeks to take the test, it can take AdSAS a little bit extra time to put the scores onto your application. Another question that comes up a lot is how many times students should take the test, whether or not it looks bad if you take the test multiple times. And so I looked into it, and one in every three dental students who sits for the national boards took the DAT multiple times. So it certainly isn't prohibiting people from getting into school, taking the test multiple times. The rules for retesting are on the screen. You have to wait at least 60 days between testing attempts. You can only have 4 test attempts within a 12-month period. Um, Once you have taken the test 3 times, you have to prove that you're actively applying to dental school in order to be able to take the test again. If you take the test 5 times, you'll be limited to 1 test per 12 months after that. Uh, I would caution you against taking the real test as a way to practice, just because whenever we send out DAT scores, we send a full history of your scores. If you have multiple test scores, you don't get to choose which scores get sent to the schools and which don't. We send a full history, and a full history will be posted onto your AdSAS application. So you don't want to take the test as a practice attempt before taking it for real. You should always make sure that you're fully prepared for any test attempt. This is just a reiteration of the different resources and what we encourage people to do. So seek counsel with your pre-health advisor or your teachers at your undergrad. Um, Go through the DAT website for all the information on applying for the test and all the rules. And then on the Prometric website, you can find that test drive, some frequently asked questions, the ADA practice test, a breakdown of what you can expect on test day. So these are just the websites to make sure you familiarize yourself with as you're um, preparing to take the test. You can always reach out to us with any questions, and that is my email address, my personal email address, if you have specific questions about anything that I've covered in the presentation here tonight. Once again, I thank you to ASDA for having me, and thank you everybody um, for attending. And with that, I am open to take any questions that have come in.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. This was great information. And a big takeaway that I heard from this session is being comfortable ahead of the exam. And you gave great strategies and resources for just that. So thank you so much. And now we're opening it up for questions. So at this time, please submit any questions that you may have through the Q&A panel to be answered by Nick as well. And it looks like we're getting some really great questions. So the first question is, how much does it cost to reschedule for an earlier test date?
The fee is the same regardless of whether you're pushing back your test date or scheduling an earlier test. It doesn't matter how soon the test you're rescheduling to. All that matters is how far in advance of your currently scheduled appointment you are rescheduling. So it doesn't, the fees are the same whether you're pushing the test back or scheduling it for earlier.
Thank you so much, Nick. And then we did get another question about retakes. And could you shed light on if test retakes are the same price as the original test scheduled?
Yes, there is not a discount for subsequent test attempts. The exam fee is the same, whether it's your first time or your fifth time taking the test. You pay the full application fee.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
We also received a question about trends. This question asks, what trends have you seen recently in DAT questions that students should be aware of and keeping in mind?
I don't know that I necessarily have any insight on trends in questions. The one thing that I would say is I get asked a lot what the hardest question or questions on the test, and just based on talking to students, I think organic chemistry is pretty universally recognized as the toughest section. So if people are looking for what to study most rigorously, I would suggest that. But in terms of questions, specific trends in questions on the test, I don't know that I have any further insight on that.
Thank you. Also received a question about the submission process. So would you recommend submitting the dental application through ADSAS before the DAT score comes in?
Yes, I think that it is easiest if you already have an open AdSAS application before you take the test, but it's not an issue if you do it in the other order. You can we often see people who will take the DAT before the AdSAS application even opens. And we'll still send their scores to AdSAS, and then once they open the application, AdSAS is generally able to pull the score um, onto the application. So I would say um, it's more common that someone has an AdSAS application, then takes the DAT, but it doesn't have to be done that way.
Thank you, Nick. An additional question came in and it says, do you have any insight on common rules that students might accidentally violate on test day, such as putting their finger up on the screen?
Yes, that is a pretty common one. You can't put anything up to the screen. Most commonly, we see that for the perceptual ability test. So that is a pretty common one. Another one is that you're not allowed to, we call it brain dumping. You cannot take notes before the test begins, say during the tutorial or anything like that. So we strongly discourage anybody from trying to do that, writing out notes on their note boards before the test actually has begun. That's a no-no. And then the other one, the biggest one, is accessing the locker on an unscheduled break and checking their phone. That's what gets people in the most trouble.
Okay, thank you. And then received another question about study tips. So I know you provided great study tips in the beginning of your presentation. Could you share additional tips as it relates to test anxiety?
So test anxiety is tough, and because it's very common to some degree. I think everybody gets test anxiety. I think really the only cure for that is knowing what it is specifically that makes you anxious, and then doing whatever you can um, to prepare yourself. I think the practice tests can help in that way, because I know some people, it's the clock, that's seeing the clock, because you're not given a ton of time for each question, and so for some people the clock is a problem, and so you do practice tests so that you can sort of anesthetize yourself against the clock. But other people, it really may benefit from the test drive, where if you know it makes you anxious to check in for a test, the lead up to it can lead to some anxiety. But really, it's just I think it's very important to feel confident, and so that's where I think making a plan um, comes into comes into play. I strongly discourage people from cramming. I don't think it helps to do like 16 hours of studying for the few days before you actually go to the test. I think rest is very important. So making sure that you're not scrambling to cover all the material you wanted on the test, making sure that you got enough sleep the night before. As I said, just making sure that you're as calm and prepared as possible for what's going to be on the test and what the testing process is going to be like.
Okay, thank you so much for shedding light on how to mitigate anxiety for test preparation. And another question we've been receiving is when is scratch paper and whiteboard use allowed? And are there any rules regarding how we use them?
So the writing on the whiteboards is allowed anytime the test is active. Anytime there's questions on the screen, you can make notes on the whiteboard. Um, and you can swap out if you fill the whiteboards up. You can request fresh sheets. You cannot write on it during your breaks or during the tutorial before the test starts, and you cannot hold it up to the screen. So those are the rules around the scratch paper, the whiteboards.
Thank you. Also received a question in regard to the cycle. So this applicant is asking, when is the latest you recommend taking the DAT if I'm applying this cycle?
Again, I think that depends on what the deadline is for your scores. So I would just recommend a month in advance of whatever the deadline is you're trying to meet. So just give yourself a month from your test date to whatever deadline for scores you have.
And then regarding scores as well, how long are these DAT scores typically good or active for?
That is entirely up to the dental schools. The ADA will consider the scores active forever. So we would never expire your scores. There's never a point at which we would no longer consider your scores active, or we'll stop sending them out. I think some of the schools insist on the scores being from within the past 2 years. Others, I think it's 5 years, but it depends on the individual schools. But I've not heard of anything shorter than 2 years.
Okay. And then Nick, I know you briefly touched on DAT scores and is the average, but could you also shed light on how you kind of know when you should retake the DAT?
I believe that as a DIA makes available a resource that gives the average score for students that were admitted to specific dental schools. So they have a resource that breaks down not what the average is on the test as a whole, which as I said is 400 or 410 depending on the section on the test, but what the average is for students who get into specific dental schools. So I believe that is available through ADIA. That's something that if people know what schools they're going to be applying to, they could check that resource and then have a general idea of what the scores are that the schools they're applying to are looking for. And then you can base your decision whether to retest off of that. If you score lower than what the schools you're applying to are going to be looking for, you can make your retest decision based off that.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. And I believe this will be our last question. But this question is, are you able to take your break earlier if you finish earlier, or does everyone who starts at the same time take that break at the same time?
Yes, if you finish the second section of the test, whenever you finish the second section of the test, you go on your break. So if you finish with time left on the clock, you have the choice to end that section and then your break starts. You don't have to sit there until the end of the until the time runs out. So yeah, if you finish early, you can end those sections of the test. You can also end your break early if you want, if you don't need to take the full time. You can go back in and choose to end the break and then move on with the test.
Okay. Once again, I just want to thank you, Nick, for your time, for your insight, and for sharing valuable information about the DAT. I hope everyone learned something tonight and feels a little bit more prepared to take the DAT. And before you go, just a few brief announcements on following ASDA to stay connected on Instagram. We'll share the Instagram handle in the chat, and that's where you'll see other programming opportunities, upcoming events for pre-dental members just for you. And so we look forward to seeing you as an ASDA pre-dental member soon, and we wish you the very best in your journey to dental school. Thank you all so much for participating in tonight's webinar, and we'll see you all very soon. Take care.